Hello everyone, my name is Matthew Silpot and welcome to this channel where we talk about music education and things concerning music learning. And today we're going to be talking about intervals. Put things out there, this is not a beginner's class. You should have some idea of theory. Um, or you can just join and catch on, that's no problem as well. So here we go. What do we know intervals to be? So the first thing is that an interval is a distance between any two notes, usually. So the people say a distance between point A or point B. And each interval has a number and a quality. So we have melodic intervals, we have harmonic intervals, and melodic intervals are read horizontally and are found in melodies, as the name suggests, melodic, whereas harmonic intervals are read vertically and are found in chords. So they are described in the same way. B to D as a melodic interval looks like this. So if you notice, you have our B here and it goes to here. So we have a melodic interval. Whereas B to D as a harmonic interval looks like this. So when we see notes together like this, we're talking about harmony. When you notice them like this, we're thinking about melody or melodic. Then we have inversion of intervals. In the inversion of intervals, the descending intervals, especially the large ones, are often easier to spell and identify through the use of interval inversion. We invert an interval by putting the bottom pitch above the top one. For example, the interval D to A inverts to A to D. When we invert an interval, the new numerical name is always different from the old one. The new numerical name can be calculated by subtracting the old numerical name from 9. Um, Again, 9 is a big number, so one to remember when we're talking about inversions of intervals. So again, the new numerical name can be calculated by subtracting the old one from 9. So for your practice, when we invert a minor 3, and by the way, when you see a small um, letter, uh, common letter, what we call them, that means minor. If it's in upper caps, that's major. And if you see a plus, you know that's be augmented. And if you see a little circle, that is diminished. P would identify those as perfect. So if we're using the concept of subtracting the number from 9, when we invert a minor third, that becomes what? A major 6. If we invert a augmented fifth, that becomes a fourth. If we invert a major 6, that becomes 3, and so on and so forth. So we can use all of those. You can do the rest. If you invert a major second, what it becomes. So the qualities of intervals. Each interval has a quality name which goes before it. So you see major 6 as there was before. There are 5 quality names with intervals. So we're talking about perfect intervals, major intervals, minor intervals, augmented intervals, and diminished intervals. In the case of major and perfect intervals, if you take a major scale, all the intervals which are built from the tonic of that scale are either major or perfect. You can think of major and perfect as a kind of default intervals, and what an example looks like this. If you look at the scale of G major as represented here, where G is a tonic note, or we know when we talk about tonic, that's number one in the octave scale, and we go all the way up to G. If the lower note of an interval is G and the upper note is one which exists in the G major scale, its quality will be either major or perfect. So major intervals are second, thirds, sixths, and sevenths. And perfect intervals are the unison, the fourth, the fifth, and the octave. So notice four of each kind. So we have the perfect interval that looks like that. Major second looks like that. A major third. Then we have a perfect fourth that looks like that. Perfect fifth looking like that. Major sixth looking like that. Major seventh. And we have a perfect octave. So sometimes you can just look at the picture of the notes and can tell the interval based on the spacing, which is what we practice to do. So the unison looks at that, second looks at that, third is close, fourth is a little, you notice it's not on a, in the space, not in a line. Fifth, there's one line between them. A sixth, line in space. The seventh, which is stretch, and then the eighth. So that's something you could practice and work on. The same is true for any major scale. So in order to understand intervals, it is essential that you're confident in your scales. You know your scales. If the upper note in an interval is not part of the major scale built from the lower note, then the interval cannot be perfect or a major. Instead, it will be an augmented or diminished minor. In the case of augmented intervals, when an interval is wider by one semitone or by a wider than a half step, then the one found in the major scale, then the interval is augmented. And here's an example. So we have a G going to a D sharp. So that would be an augmented fifth. All right? So first, what we do is work out the interval number, count up the letter names, and it's easy to get the names, to get the intervals. So it's from G to D, that's a fifth, because we say G, A, B, C, D. So we have a fifth. Next, look at the fifth in the G major scale. The note is supposed to be a D natural, right? So if we see ish, an accidental so in the sharp, we know that something is up. So in this interval, we have D sharp instead of a D natural. So that means that this interval is one semitone wider than the one found in the major scale itself. Therefore, the interval that we are seeing is an augmented interval. In fact, if you raise each note of the major scale by a semitone without changing the letter names of the notes, you will make all the intervals augmented. Notice here. To get an augmented unison, we have a G going to a G sharp. If we get an augmented second, we have a G going to an A sharp. An augmented third, we have G going to B sharp, and so on and so forth. In the case of minor intervals, a minor interval is one semitone or a half step smaller than a major interval. So remember, the quality major applies only to the second, third, sixth, and seventh numbers. So you only have major seconds, major thirds, major sixth, and major seventh. We don't have major one. We don't have major four. We don't have major five. We don't have major eight. We have them perfect. So it's a perfect unison, a perfect fourth, a perfect fifth, or a perfect eighth octave. This interval is a sixth, so we have in G to an E flat, because in the G major scale, what is E? E is supposed to be a natural. So E flat now raises eyebrows to say what's going on. E flat makes the interval smaller by one semitone, so now it's a minor sixth. So don't fall in the trap of thinking that minor intervals occur in minor scales and major intervals in major scales. That is road to destruction. This only half true. While major scales don't contain minor intervals, built from the tonic, minor scales do contain major intervals. Minor intervals only apply to seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths, right? So because the interval is major, the next step is either minor, if you get it smaller. You cannot have a minor fifth because it's already a perfect interval. So if you alter it, if you make it smaller, it becomes a diminished fifth. If it becomes bigger, it becomes an augmented fifth. All right? A diminished interval is one semitone or half step smaller than a minor or perfect interval. A diminished a diminished interval is one semitone or a half step smaller than a minor or a perfect interval. A perfect interval. A diminished interval is one tone or a whole step smaller than a major interval. So look at the example. So a diminished interval is one tone or a whole step smaller than a major interval. So in this example, we have a G going to a C flat. Now a G to C, what is that interval naturally? It is a fourth or perfect fourth. G, A, B, C. Remember we say fourths are always perfect. So if we alter the fourth, if we have in this case a G going to a C flat, that's something to ponder about. G to C natural is a perfect fourth. C flat makes the interval one semitone narrower or smaller, so then it becomes a diminished fourth. G to F sharp is a major seventh. G to F natural is one semitone smaller, so what it is? A minor seventh. G to F flat is two semitones smaller than a major, so it now becomes a diminished. So because here we are, G to F natural, if we put F sharp, G to F sharp, sorry, G to F sharp is our major seventh. If we put F natural, it makes it smaller, so it becomes a minor. And if we put F flat, it becomes even smaller, so now it's a diminished. Now there are some tricky intervals. So the system for working out intervals is easy when you know your major scales. However, some major scales are more awkward than others, so don't even exist, right? So you may have some scales that are out there. In the first case here, you'd need to know the scale of C sharp major, which is an awkward scale. So we have C sharp going to A sharp there, right? But it does exist. In the second case, you'd need to know the G double sharp major scale, which that one not really exists. Because what is G double sharp enharmonically? G double sharp is A major, so it's easier to write in A major than G double sharp. But in this case, we have G double sharp going to D sharp. Because what would be natural is that G double sharp should be going to D double sharp, which would make it a perfect fifth. But if we have just a G sharp to go into D sharp, that now makes it smaller, so that becomes a diminished. In cases like these, it is usually a good idea to simplify the interval. To do this, you need to move both notes by the same amount in the same direction without changing the letter name. So in the first case, C sharp major is an awkward case, but C major is easy. So to change C sharp to C natural, you need to move it down by one semitone, right? So C sharp now becomes C, and A sharp now becomes A. Yeah. Now work out the interval as before. The note A is part of the C major scale, so this is a major sixth. The original interval C sharp to A sharp is also a major sixth, and so is C flat to A flat, of course. So let's do the same with the second tricky interval. The lower note is G double sharp, but G natural would make things a lot simpler. So G double sharp is two semitones or two half steps higher than G natural. So you need to move the lower G double sharp by a tone, one tone, to get the G natural. And then you do the same to the upper note. Move D sharp down by two semitones and you get the same thing without changing the letter name. So then you will arrive at this interval, G going to D flat, which is going to be the same interval as G double sharp to D sharp. So I hope that is clearer for you in terms of working out intervals, but here's a quick checkpoint for what we did. What is the term for an interval in which the notes are played in succession instead of simultaneously? If you said melodic, then you are correct. Is there such a thing as a minor fifth or a perfect sixth? No. We have major sixths and we have perfect fifths. So all the fives are usually perfect. If it's a sixth, it's a major. A perfect interval made a half step smaller without changing its numerical name becomes what? Remember, a perfect interval. If it's a perfect and you make it smaller, it then becomes a diminished interval. A diminished fifth inverted now becomes what? So if we flip 5, remember that number 9, then we become a fourth, an augmented fourth. Intervals that are relative displeasing to the ear is classified as what? If the intervals are displeasing to the ear, you may classify them as dissonant intervals, right? So like a second, it's really not showing like perfection. So, yeah. So that's intervals, and I hope you understand clearly, if you didn't before, the whole idea of working with intervals. And the same is true of working with larger intervals. All right? So have a great one. Thank you for joining. See you next time on Music Theory class. I will talk about something else new and exciting. What good? Do these things in some of your spare time to kind of remember like your especially major scales. That will help you a lot. All right? So see you next time.